is Ian Berry, and welcome to another Sparkenation conversation. For those of you that don't know, you need a reminder. A Sparkenation is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. And I'm sure today with our special guest, Simone, who I think she's the first presenter of these to be backed by popular demand. So Simone, we welcome you once again. Simone is an esteemed member of the Wise Leaders community, in particular the Heart Leadership Online Village, and Paul and Donovan, also online, are members of that community, and good to see some moral support from the fellow residents in the village, Simone. But today's topic of setting yourself free from your limiting beliefs, I think, will be a fantastic topic to dig into. And Simone is highly experienced in this area, given her work as a senior leader in a local council, but she's also done many other things that she may tell you about along the way. So Simone, welcome once again as our special guest.
Thanks, Ian. Really appreciated.
Welcome, Panza, to the program, and thank you all for being on video. We do like to see who you are. I was saying to a group I was with this morning that the more we do this, the better connected we get on Zoom. And one of those ways is to be able to see each other all the time and see the whites of your eyes, as it were. I'm also letting David in. So, Simone, I thought that I mean, a limiting belief for me is any belief that really inhibits me from bringing my best self to the world. And so I thought we might sort of start there, because I guess we've all got different views on what is a limiting belief. So I thought we might start there. Welcome, David. We've just begun. We might start there, Simone. What is a limiting belief?
Wonderful, Ian. Well, you couldn't have articulated that more perfectly. And it really is, as you've just said, that sort of limits you from experiencing the world. It's really a set of thoughts, attitudes, or even acceptance of a belief essentially without proof. And it often stops you from doing something without even you realizing it. Often makes you play a lot smaller in the world without you even realizing that that's the effect that you have. Often limiting beliefs are shaped by past experiences, such as your upbringing, also the people that you interact with, your environment, and they can actually get more and more oppressive as you go through life and as you have different life experiences, if you're not necessarily aware of that.
Well, what a way to look at it. And I'm sure that as I look around the room, can anyone label, put a limiting belief out there so we can get a handle on what one looks like? It's all very well, isn't it, to have the theory, but what does one look like?
What about my limiting belief that I'm a horrible administrator?
Well, I mean, that's probably a good example. I wouldn't put my hand up for that one, so you and I would be good in partnership, David. But that is a good one. I was going to sort of say, the imposter syndrome that a lot of us
Absolutely
get can be another one. What others are around the room?
What about our comfort zones?
Yep, definitely.
Yep. Any others?
What about phobias? I have fear of heights, and I've challenged that recently, but phobias could be limiting.
100%.
Yeah. Any others that come to mind?
Maybe that you're not worthy of, progression or that next challenge or step, or you just
beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good one, Sharon. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Yeah. And when you think about limiting beliefs, there's sort of two types of them. There's the intrinsic and there's the extrinsic. So the intrinsic is really often start with, it centers around yourself, which is the I can't, I don't, I'm not. So some of those examples you've put up there around, you know, I'm too old, or I'm too young, I'm too, whatever that might be, I'm too busy, I'm not confident, I don't deserve this, I don't do well in relationships, I can't run, I'm not fit. And you can see how it's all focused around you. Then there's the externalized or the extrinsic beliefs, which is really focused around the environment. So there's not enough time. There's not enough this, the world is against me. It's very much the externalized view of your environment. So one of the things to be aware of as you start to think through and as we go through this conversation is really around what might your beliefs start to be, and they overlay in everything that you do in life as you go about every moment within your life, and start to take notice on whether those beliefs are intrinsic or extrinsic as well. And the first part of sort of starting to understand limiting beliefs is to start to bring that awareness in ways like how David Deansford spoke about the ignorance. It's starting to bring some awareness to those beliefs, and then starting to understand what they are. Where did they come from? And then the third part around limiting beliefs is starting to reprogram or reframe or undergo, I much prefer a metamorphosis into the future. What does that actually look like? And limiting beliefs are often driven by fear. You know, people's wounds essentially drive their worth. And as I sort of started to highlight a moment ago, as people experience different life experiences, often they become a lot more oppressive. And the reason for that, if you think of yourself as a child and what you were able to achieve as a child, or what your dreams were as a child, you dreamed big when you're a child. And what happens as you go through life, that the boundaries of what you experience and as you experience start to get smaller and smaller with each of your negative, potentially perceived negative experiences, or as complications start to go through life. So if you get hurt in a previous relationship, will you likely go to the edge of those boundaries again? Yes or no? As you start to navigate your way through your professional career, will you start to push the boundaries of what you can do if you haven't been successful in that job interview, or if you had a bad experience at work? And those boundaries then start to get closer and closer in as you experience the different experiences through life, and you start to play much smaller in that space, so that therefore your circle of experiences from the beliefs that you have carried through those starts to get much smaller and smaller. And so really, when you start to think about you and yourself, it really starts to become, we don't see the world as it is, we generally see the world as we are. And it's about starting to bring that awareness out through to, well, what are we?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things there. And one of the things that immediately came to my mind was, so a way to get past our limiting beliefs is to be more childlike. Not childish, but more childlike.
Correct.
It seems like you're saying we're the sum of our experiences. You know, if a cat's been kicked its whole life, it's not going to go near too many people, right?
Correct. Couldn't agree more on that. And it's about, how do you bring awareness to that to be able to break through that? What does that look like to you?
So Simone, I think you've got some exercises or ways that we might bring awareness.
Absolutely, yes. So in order to bring awareness, it's first and foremost looking at those micro moments in life that drive your decisions and being able to catch yourself in that. So an example being, you know, you could have a job opportunity come your way and you go, whatever that might be, whether you go for it or don't go, or likely not go for it. And you sit there and you go, well, why aren't I going for it? And it's looking at those micro moments and bringing an awareness to those micro moments of why. And why is such a powerful question. And or the opposite, why not, is also just as powerful. So depending on the connotation, the why or the why not paradigm can actually start.
Brian's throwing in there, Simone, sliding doors.
Oh, certainly, absolutely. There are so many sliding door moments in life as well. So, you know, an example being is I can't run. Now, that limiting belief came from when I was in grade 1, I believe, when I was put into the fast club, even though I knew I couldn't run. And I ended up going 200 meters behind everyone, barely able to breathe by the finish line. And that story and that belief carried with me all the way through to my mid-20s when I broke through that and went, I'm going to play soccer. I'm still playing soccer 15 years later. I kicked 2 goals last night against a bunch of mid-20-year-olds, but that's a limiting belief. That just shows how pervasive it could actually be. What does that actually look like? You know, I'm not fit was another one. I was never fit in school, and that was a story I carried with me. Well, up until 3 years ago, I was actually exercising, probably the fittest person I knew around, and quite athletic in physique up until 3 years ago. Okay, so I had a child, and my new limiting belief started to be, well, I'm a mother now. I'm not fit, or I don't have to be fit. So I've reframed that in the last couple of months and reintroduced exercise back into my life. And I go, well, actually, I am fit. It's just fitness in a different way. And that's the same with, you know, relationships, the I'm too old paradox as well, or the I'm too young is often, or I'm not experienced enough, I'm not confident enough, I'm not, all of that. There's not enough time. And so it's in those micro moments of whatever you are thinking to catch yourself. And that's how you start to identify those beliefs, and then actually questioning to yourself, why? Where did that come from? That starts to bring some of the understanding. And I guess what I'd like to know, just as we're talking, is there anything coming to anyone's minds? And Ian, if you've got a belief that you've had, where might that have come from?
I was just about to ask the question, you know, where do these come from? Because it seems to me that we made all this up.
Yeah. Well, it's very easy where it comes from, and it's driven out of one thing, and that's fear. Going back to David's discussion last month, fear of being wrong, fear of being a failure, fear of not of having the education, fear of not knowing, fear of disappointment, fear of criticism, fear of being hurt, fear. And it's essentially your mind's way of being able to protect itself from that hurt as such. So, you know, what does it end up leading you to at the end of the day? Well, it ends up leading you to, I guess, an erosion of your own happiness, because you start to play smaller and start to think smaller in all of that too.
One of the ones that still lingers for me, Simone and everyone, is fear of the dark. When I was a child, the toilet was outside the house, and it was quite a distance. And so as children, we had to, you know, go to the toilet in the dark quite often. And, you know, as we sort of grow older, various people would say, well, you know, you're a big person now, so you can go on your own. And there was a light in the actual toilet, but until you were tall enough, you couldn't reach it. And so you needed someone else to come and turn the light on. And of course, some adults would play, you know, nasty games and say, you know, you don't really need the light on, do you? And so that fear of the dark sometimes, you know, still comes back to me, even though I'm 67 years old, when I'm in the dark and I'm not sure where I am, or I'm uncertain about the next step, or I can't see the next step. That fear of the dark still comes back. And that's a limiting belief, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because there's really nothing to be afraid of. It's just what we've told ourselves.
It's your past experience from your childhood that is still impacting on you so many years later. And, you know, I always said, I play soccer because it tricks my mind that I'm not running. Whereas now I just go, you know what, I run and that's okay. But that was once again my story, and my limiting belief that I had around myself is that I couldn't run unless I was in participation sports. And you can see how the mind starts to still try to close you in, even in those moments as well. And Ian, I guess what I'm interested in is, how do you work through in understanding that as well?
Well, I guess today I'll give you the short answer, because there is the longer answer, and that's about listening to your heart first and not listening to your mind first. And I think that's a place to, you know, perhaps start as a quick sort of way, because, you know, as some of you know, I'm in the field of heart leadership, and I wrote the book about heart leadership. And it's really about hearing your heart first. And essentially for me, as I learned to do that over about a 3-year period, I actually had to tell my mind to be quiet, because the mind is very much about the past, whereas the heart's very much about the present and the future. And so that's how, you know, gradually over time, as different things pop up, I mean, still, you know, imposter syndrome, for example, comes back to visit me from time to time. And that's how I deal with it, is immediately go into my heart and get a feel for the scenario, and then move to the head, because I think the head, you know, it's really a trained response, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so I'm partly, as I'm doing that, I'm actually retraining my mind, because as neuroscience is teaching us, we can rewire the brain.
Absolutely. And up until a few years ago, we never thought that we could, but we can. There are different ways to rewire the brain.
Indeed.
Each and every day. And it ultimately starts with those micro moments. So the first and foremost, the catch. So catching yourself in those thoughts, catching yourself in those beliefs, to just stop and observe. And it's as simple as that, because as soon as you bring that awareness, that's the start of the path. The next step is the understanding. Understanding, where did it come from? And actually delving in deep, where did this belief come from, or likely to have come from? And as I said before, it may have occurred, it's often shaped by our past experiences, that being what you've experienced, your upbringing, people that you've interacted with. Parents are a significant ones in shaping limiting beliefs. I have my partner here sitting there going, I can't swim. Well, actually, you can swim. You were never taught. And he has a fear of the water, and that's come directly from his mother, because his mother has said, I'm scared of drowning. Very, very clearly, I'm scared of drowning. So he's now taken that fear around water and around drowning. And it is so powerful from your childhood, those belief sets that are set, and the environment that you're in, and even the environment that of people that you work with and interact now. So, you know, imagine me, I'm in a neuroscience world at the time, and I go, I'm going to go into business. Everyone around me at the time was, you can't do that. You're in neuroscience. you're right in neuroscience. And it's like, well, why not? that's the question. Why not? So it's really important to understand the people that you interact with as well, and how they also assist and also hinder your limiting beliefs as well. And so I'm interested, has any limiting beliefs potentially come to mind as we are discussing? I mean, I think we've probably delved on about 30 of them already in different forms and shapes. Does anyone have a relationship to any of those beliefs that, that have been highlighted so far?
Yes.
Let's explore that. That was my dog Molly, who wanted to enter the conversation.
She agreed. I don't think she has limiting beliefs, though, Molly. I think she's pretty confident in her own purr. Look, it's a funny topic, I think. I reckon I'm like most people probably sitting here now watching and listening. We all have many self-limiting beliefs, I'd say. My biggest problem is need, I feel like, to have validation all the time. I think that limits me in some ways. So it's sort of the same, but slightly different. A bit feeling as like I like to impact things. But at the same time, sometimes you feel like, have I or haven't I? Have I upset them? Like, and then you get this real bad spiral of overthinking. Then, so it's sort of the same but slightly different, I suppose.
Absolutely. Definitely. It's that need for validation. So there's something somewhere in the past where maybe you not have been validated. So you've left searching for that. So in a way, it's like you're not a success at whatever that is if you haven't been validated. Yeah. And that's the part of your limiting belief. And just to start to become aware of that, and as you move forward, where might that have come from? And it's just an understanding and awareness of that before we work on, I guess, the reframing, the reprogramming, the metamorphosis perspective. And so as we're talking, what I would love all of you to do is just to write down as many of those limiting beliefs that you think you may have. A lot of mine, has in the past focused around either the I'm too old, or I'm too young, I don't have enough experience, or I have too much experience. As I said, fitness, I can't run, I'm not fit. As a mother, I said I'm not maternal at all. You can start to see a little bit of a pattern happening there. I don't have enough time, I'm too busy. And it's about writing that down to then just start to bring those awareness in the moments moving forward. How do they play in your life? So when you're asked with a decision or an activity or a discussion, how do you actually play that out? Because it really then plays into your everyday environment. Whether you take that opportunity or you don't take that opportunity. And it starts to really then showcase being around, we see the world as it is. Sorry, we don't see the world as it is, but we rather see the world as we are. And so therefore, how do your beliefs play in as you are? And so that beautiful example that David's put forward, he doesn't feel like he's essentially been a success at whatever he's put his mind to, unless he's had that validation. So he needs that validation for it to be a success, for him to see it as a success.
It's funny that too, Simone. I think having worked in the finance industry in the years between 2004 to 2010, where we're so incentivized and it was all based on what you did well. Like you get to a point where nothing, meets that need that you're seeking about that validation that you're talking about. It doesn't matter how good you go, you're sort of thinking that I'll do better next time. And this continual seek for improvement almost does the same thing in a way, like in terms of, yeah, I got this, but now I should do that. And like you're never fulfilled by it in a way. And then you need someone else to validate you then, because you can't do it yourself.
I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
What's coming to others' minds as we're talking?
I think one of the other areas that that we can suffer from is a third area beyond intrinsic and extrinsic, and that is the systemic area.
Yes.
where we actually say the system, you know, the government, all government's terrible, all politicians are liars, and the issues around racism and beliefs around racism and all the other gender biases that people have, and all of those that are outside of ourselves and outside of another person, but are more broad and into the system.
Absolutely. They are beliefs of the world and beliefs of the system. And there is so much, discussion around gender bias, around cultural bias as well.
Yeah.
And it's about breaking that down. And we are not even aware of how our decisions even impact on others in all of that too.
Fair to say, I think, Simone and David and folks, that there's a few systemic societal issues right before us at this moment, with the appalling treatment of women in our parliament, and the continued lack of respect for women, in my view, by the responses. I wonder what's coming out for me, Simone, too, is what are the triggers of these things? It's like a limiting beliefs associated to experience, like my fear of the dark comes from that experience as a child. But then there are things that trigger those beliefs, aren't there? Like when there's, like for me, you know, I'm dedicated my life to eliminating injustice. So when I see the current situation, I can't help but get passionate about trying to do something about it, because to me, it's a plain injustice that women, our Indigenous people, people in minorities in a general rule, are not treated with respect. And that kind of fires me up. So that's a bit of a trigger that might bring a limiting belief in. You hear what I'm saying? And I wonder how much, Simone and others, do these triggers sort of start the limiting belief, and then it's a bit of a downhill spiral from there, isn't it?
I think those voices in your head that give rise to limiting beliefs are probably other people's voices, and it's more a fear of what other people will say or think about an action or a course, rather than what we're telling ourselves.
Spot on. That's isn't it funny? Like you're spot on. When Simone mentions about when you're young, it might be your mum or your dad or your school teacher or another kid in your class, but it doesn't stop ever. Like there's certain people that you think about more. Like even you, Ian. Like I think about Ian and Simone, and I think about your voices in my head sometimes. You know,
what would Ian say?
Yeah, like
that's a bit of a worry being in your head, David.
Well, yeah, there's lots going on in there apparently, but it's all good. It's I think there's positives you can draw from it, because you think about, like I think about your words all the time, Ian and Simone in particular, like it, and in a way that's good positives. But what Paul was saying there is there's some other people you think, oh shit, they knocked me about that, so then that sticks in your head, and you know, I don't.
Almost like part of it's accountability.
Yeah, the accountability, exactly.
Part of it's accountability to people in a positive way, and the other part of it's just fear of what someone else might think or say or do.
Yeah, exactly. And then it inhibits your what you do next about another scenario, because you're worried about what that person will say.
Interesting, you know, because from a bigger perspective, and you know, I know in my work, those of you that are familiar, I talk a lot about the most successful workplaces and the most successful teams, whether it's in business or sport or wherever it happens to be. There are three things that stand out for me. One is that people feel valued. The other is that people live values, and the other is an exchange and a delivery of value. But it's this first one, people feeling valued, that seems to be at the core, and it often drives the other two. Because in teams or organisations or families or neighbourhoods or wherever it is where people don't feel valued, then it seems to me that that's where we see limiting beliefs at play. But when people feel valued or validated, to use David's term, there's less limiting beliefs. Am I right in my observations?
Absolutely.
When people feel valued, there's less limiting beliefs.
Yeah, and then you stop second guessing yourself, because if you're dealing with a person that you
I think
feel valued by, you're free and you're uninhibited in your thinking.
Yes, David?
I was just wondering about that. Whether is there a direct relationship between being valued and then less limiting beliefs? And I'm just wondering whether we can find data on that, because I don't know the answer to that. That's an interesting. I mean, it feels as though it could be right, it could be appropriate, but do we have? It'd be interesting to actually test that out. In a similar sense to, so the issue of being validated is one, and the other one is, or being valued, and the other one is this whole current, and I hope it's not a fad, but it might be, of psychological safety, which we're hammering at the moment. And when I think about it, the focus in psychological safety is about making the workplace safe to speak up, safe to speak your truth. And then I think, well, hang on a tick. It may have nothing to do with the workplace, but the individual's limiting belief.
Correct.
That they bring to the place rather than the place creating it, or
David, when you said psychological safety,
say again, Paul.
And you think you can't do it until you realise that 50 metres ago your dad let go and you're actually doing it.
It's a bit like that. It did raise for me, David, Paul, and others. It did raise for me as you were saying that, David. Do organisations have limiting beliefs?
Absolutely.
And is that really what might be going on in our federal parliament at the moment? That there's a kind of belief, well, this is the way it is, and so that's a limiting belief.
100% agree. 100% agree. I mean, all the work that I do is with people who have limiting beliefs. I think Simone would say the same thing. It is essentially dealing with limiting beliefs. I mean, I'm very close to the situation going on with the Brereton report at the moment, because the SAS regiment is a client of mine, and I'm horrified with the limiting beliefs that the whole of the ADF has. Their limiting belief is so limiting that they've actually dismissed soldiers who've been accused and without trial. I mean, they've terminated their career on the one hand, and on the other hand, they have protected the senior officers from any accountability. It's just, and that's a limiting belief that's created all of that. Last year, the military dismissed 6 soldiers before trial, and 5 of them were found not guilty. And had to reverse all those, very punitive actions they took. I mean, that's all about limiting beliefs. It's all about, which is largely based on fear.
Yep, it is absolutely fear across an organisation or within a culture of what you can and you can't do. And so limiting beliefs, I guess, really give you the permission to give up, to not try, to not move forward, to stay in, and to stay in the past, as Ian has said, from a head space. So the question then starts to become is, how do you move yourself forward? How do you open yourself up to the possibility? So what I've spoken about is, firstly, I guess, an awareness, and all of you there have sat down and started to bring some awareness to your own limiting beliefs. in terms of writing them down and starting to just document them. And as we've been talking as well, starting to bring a bit of an understanding. So where might some of them have come from for you, for you in your past, in your history, as a result of your upbringing, as a result of the environment, as a result of the conversations that you have, as a result of the people you interact with. And limiting beliefs can be even set off by a single word or a single sentence that someone has said at a pivotal moment in time, or a single experience that in the context of life might not be taken with any grain of salt. But when the similar set of circumstances arise, you've got that belief. And it can often be quite difficult to try to trace the lineage on some of these as well.
Maybe,
yeah.
Simone, I was just going to say, maybe that's, I was sitting here contemplating, like nobody in this room today had trouble naming their limiting beliefs. And yet out there in society, we seem to have a lot of trouble. And I wonder what's going on with that. Like, it seems to me that there are common sense pathways. So I don't know whether any of you had a chance to listen to the Australian of the Year's National Press Club address today, but whether you had a chance to hear some of that. But it was just, I only had a chance to just sort of take a look at a little bits, but it was extraordinary to see a woman who, you know, apart from the fact that her recovery from sexual abuse is one of the reasons she is where she is, but her extraordinary power. She really, and a lot of people were saying in Twitter and other places while they were watching that here's real leadership actually happening before our eyes. And did anyone else have a chance to look at? But she had to, and she spoke about this a little bit, she had to overcome an incredible number of limiting beliefs to get to where she was able to be where she is now. And I think it's an address that everyone should, you know, I hope it was recorded so that everyone gets a chance to take a look, because that to me is the greatest example I've seen of recent times of how someone has overcome all sorts of terrible things and really stands in their own space and their own power today.
So the question starts to become, how do you open yourself up to possibility? How do you turn those limiting beliefs into more of an empowering belief set? How do you actually play bigger or not, I guess, drive? How do you enable driving fear out of the taking fear out of the picture, drive fear out of the picture? And, you know, I love the idea of a butterfly in a way. A butterfly has everything that it needs to undergo metamorphosis. You know, from the caterpillar to build the cocoon to the soup, and you emerge. So it is always a constant rework of yourself in that way. And I tend to think that we as humans can also undergo the same thing, just with our own tool set with ourselves, in order to be able to move past the limiting beliefs into whatever that future may hold, or whatever that comes your way from an environment sense. When you think about Michael Jordan, because, you know, I do like to put a few quotes in here and there. But Michael Jordan says you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And you know, that's one of the things that drives a lot of things that I do. That if you're not there, if you're not doing it, you're gonna miss the shots. So it's about then, how do you turn those limiting beliefs into something that's much more empowering for yourself?
And Simone, you've got some tools for us.
I've got a couple.
A couple of tools, but I thought before we get into the tools, it just might be good to bring some others into the conversation.
Absolutely.
So, Peter, I'm looking at you as it turns out. First up, I wonder what's coming up. What are you hearing yourself as we have this conversation?
I'm just floating at the moment because I'm just taking in all of the goodness that you're sharing. But I surrendered to corporate life 3 years ago, and I realized on reflection, it's kind of taken all of these three years to shake off a lot of these limiting beliefs that were becoming quite ingrained with me. And I think your comment, Ian, nearer the front, kind of really just hit the bullseye for me, where everybody, when I say everybody, that's quite a loose, broad range, but so many people are running at an incredible speed, living through their thoughts in their mind, that the second you actually take a breath, pause, and actually drive things through your heart is when everything changes. And one of the things that kind of encouraged my surrendering to corporate life was how it sort of scared me, how much people have lost the art of the simplicity of saying thank you. So that's the big thing for me currently is is trying to bring that back. But I think one of the other, so I'm just rambling because there's so many things coming out of my mind with this, but one of the things that thinking with mind and with heart is quite a common thing that I hear people asking or saying to people is, what's wrong with you? It's quite a common question that I hear that you hear in, particularly in the business environment, but what's wrong with you, rather than asking people, are you okay? So I don't know if any of this is making sense because I'm just freewheeling as I share what's going around in my mind in this moment. But I think the more we can channel our mind into through our heart is when the flavor really changes.
Well, you'd have no argument from me, Peter. What else is coming up for other folks? I know there's a lot going on in the chat as well, which is, and I think there's some good things there. Brian, you talked about limiting beliefs actually protect society at times, which was, I think, is an interesting observation. Maybe you'd like to elaborate on that a bit, Brian.
Sure, Ian. I actually made a quick dash trip to Ballarat last night. My eldest daughter has started uni and living on campus, and we went out to dinner and I saw where she lived and all the other bits and pieces. And when we were returning home back to her on residence camp place after dinner, it was like they got told not to be walking through the park, which is a direct line from the uni to where they live, after dark. Now, is that one of those self-limiting beliefs sitting there saying to the girls, you're not strong enough to protect yourself, or is it actually a protection mechanism so that, it was just one of those pondering questions of what recent events and statements have I heard that I can actually bring it in? Another one, self-limiting beliefs might be around things to do with potentially COVID and transmission of diseases and those sorts of different things. Where does some of those things become, they're self-limiting beliefs, but they're also societal beliefs that have got a background in self-preservation of society?
Well, this could be Pandora's box, Brian. This
didn't mean to do that.
So, but no, I think it's wonderful that you've raised it as well, because I think it's on the minds of everyone. I was my wife and I were talking about to our daughter yesterday, and she's 44. She turned 44 yesterday. So, but what a terrible place we have in society where young women can't walk through the park to go home.
Yeah, and as a parent, I'm sitting there going, I'm more than happy for you to walk around the outside with a group of friends or catch an Uber or whatever.
Of course. But I wonder what role limiting beliefs played in us getting to the place of having to make such a rule. Like, I fully get the rule and I support the rule, but I wonder what led us there.
I think there's some merit in what you're saying, though, in terms of there's cases where the self-limiting belief is actually sort of needed. Like certainly like as a male, like what you were saying there before about being able to comfortably walk around. Well, we don't have that concern. I say that very loosely, but females do in the dark in particular, which is not right, and we shouldn't have that problem in the first place. But as a male observing other females, I'm worried about them too, I must admit, which is not right in some cases either. But it just depends on where they're walking and what the circumstances are. Like, I don't know. I think there's some cases where it's a protection mode, but in some cases it probably really shouldn't be needed in the first place.
If you think about going back, I think it was Simone that shared us a story in Chicago. Was it Chicago?
Yes, that is correct.
Where the self-limiting belief about being alone and traveling and those sorts of things, if that had kicked into a self-preservation mode where, you know, I think I have absolutely too many self-limiting beliefs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't, but I also think that they are part of our protection mechanism as well. And that little voice that sits there and says, I'm climbing a rope ladder and I'm going 3 meters off the ground, I'm okay. Or I'm climbing a rope ladder and I'm 25 meters off the ground. And that little voice that says, hey, this is not a good idea, can at times be the right voice.
Correct. And for those of you who don't know, I may or may not have gotten myself lost in the Chicago ghettos at one point in my life, and ended up having a little white van following me as I crossed the road as I was by myself. The little white the little white person with a huge amount of shopping bags, a lost young tourist. So that got me out of there pretty quickly to get out of there. Jenny, I noticed that you unmuted yourself.
I got a bit fired up.
Great, fire away.
It's one of my I know what it is, and I've always put it aside. It's just my opinion is not valid, and I know it comes from my parents, and they didn't mean it. It just, you know, you grow up and you quietly go on with life. And when women, we're talking about whether women can walk in parks, yes, they can. It's not about them needing to be protected. It's about the behaviour of others who are doing the wrong thing. So please do not say that we need, well, there should be, it's a big discussion. It's a Pandora's box, I think, Ian, but I really it's not about women needing to be protected. It's about saying the behaviour of the people who are doing the wrong thing need to be addressed.
Well, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Like, this is the worry I have. Like, couldn't agree with you anymore. It's not that the female should feel really safe, and she should be happy to walk amongst wherever she wants. And this is what the problem we have with the society, I believe.
That's a society belief. That's a limiting belief of society. That's
absolutely. But in some cases, I think what can't remember the guy's name with the beard there that was commenting before.
That's Brian. Yep.
In some ways, sometimes I think what you're saying is spot on, but at the same time, the female should still have a little bit of she should feel safe. At the same time, not too safe in some cases, purely on the basis of the fact because you have these wrong people in our society to wreck it for everyone else, unfortunately. And that's
I think women walk around already feeling they already are protecting themselves.
Yeah.
It's that internal protection that, I think it's another topic for another time.
One of the things that Grace Tame really nailed today in her address to the National Press Code, and I'm paraphrasing her, you go to the text to get the right context, but she basically said, it isn't women that need to change behaviour, it's men.
Yes.
And there was an audible gasp in the room when she said, as I say, I'm paraphrasing her, but I think, you know, when people have the courage to name it like she did, I think everyone feels a bit stronger. And I think we therefore start to put aside some of our limiting beliefs around this, as well as our, you know, protection around these these kind of things. So I think yes, it's a big subject, but I think it's still key, isn't it, Simone, to
Absolutely
what we're talking about today.
And I'm also really pleased, Jenny, to hear that you've probably known all your whole life as well, your own limiting belief and exactly where it's come from. And you've just said it straight out. It's come from your parents.
But how do I do that? Because, but how do you find, I just said it's catching yourself. I've got examples at work and I think, why don't I say something? Because they end up making the decision. I go, well, that's what I would have done. Why did I let you make that decision where I could have done it? In that team dynamic that we have, and to say something here with people I don't even know.
And that's a first step. That's absolutely a first step because you're now super aware of it and you actually now are saying something.
But you got me fired up on a pretty good topic.
Well,
gender inequity. So
we all honour your courage, Jenny.
Oh, thank you, Ian.
I think as a flow on from what I think it was David who said, but all living beings have a natural instinct to avoid danger, and perhaps those are the limiting beliefs we should be listening to.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I just wanted to add to what you mentioned earlier. You said, if you feel valued, that tends to sort of reduce the amount of limiting beliefs you have. I think one other important one is if you can operate as whatever person you are without being pretentious. You don't, if you feel that you can be who you are, you don't have to put up a mask around you. You just don't have to follow the norms. That sort of helps you, also really reduce your limiting beliefs quite a bit. If you feel you're part of it.
True, Venu.
I couldn't agree more, Venu. It is really then understanding who you are, because often these limiting beliefs actually determine and define who you are. So it's about unmasking them to really understand who you are. And from that, from those moments, and Jenny has done, I guess, a great first step, which is in that sort of metamorphosis part, or the reprogramming or the reframing, is to actually go, why? Catching yourself in that moment to say why. Sometimes, and that's sort of tool one, if you'd want to call it tools, sometimes that is enough for you then to speak up. And in that moment, Jenny, you were probably saying, as we were talking about limiting beliefs, you probably caught yourself in that moment to say why. And then all of a sudden, and you're on mute right now, but all of a sudden you spoke up just like that. So tool one is either the why or the why not, whatever that opposite is.
Yeah, and it was the why. It was, well, why not say it? Because it's what I believe. I think it was valid that I felt that way, but just going under, trusting yourself that you know what you're talking about. And if you don't, you go with your heart, which is something I think I value in decision makers.
This is a sparkenation conversation. So that's what happened. You had a spark that ignited passion, that changed what's normal. You've just lived the sparkenation.
And if you feel so strongly about some of your limiting beliefs you have, there is so many different tools, techniques, and modalities that you can use to work through those limiting beliefs. So it's not always you yourself, but there's you with others. And this is, through this conversation, you've in terms of peers and colleagues, we now know that of you, Jenny, and we keep you throughout our relationship with you. We keep you accountable for that in a way, because you've shared that. You can get professional assistance. This is, your EFT, your tapping. It's your kinesiology, coaching, mentoring, courses. So if you go, I don't know enough about that. Well, go and find out the knowledge on that type of thing. But then there's the work on yourself can be simple tools such as the why or the why not paradigm, to actually catch yourself in the moment. Another one is reframing, and I love reframing, which is actually, as I've sort of asked you all to start to write down all of your beliefs and what's the reframe of them. So reframes, I've started to describe a couple of the reframes without even terming it necessarily reframes, but you know, I live a full and fulfilled life, rather than I'm too busy. I'm too busy for that. So as soon as you start to reframe it into full and fulfilled life, you then start to go, well, what's the crap that I don't want to be doing that is making me busy as such? And you start to question those other aspects of your life. And, you know, other parts I've added to my reframe of I'm too busy is where I am present in the moment. So it actually then starts to ground me. So the I'm too busy, which is just the go ahead and do things cyclical type of thing. My reframe on that is I live a full and fulfilled life where I am present in the moment. So that in itself is my new belief. And that's that empowering belief to then enable me to then only include things in my life that I truly care about, that fulfill me, but keep me present. There is enough time to do what I choose. Now that starts to bring intention to that so-called business or run of life. I know how to navigate challenges with ease. So, you know, that's too hard or I can't do that can be reframed into something like I know how to navigate challenges, and I've added with ease. Because challenges can be hard and they can, but that's why I've said navigate. So as I'm talking and I'm sort of bringing a few forward, I want you to start to think about what would the reframes of some of your beliefs look like, what did that look like, and start to play around with words, write a few down. You know, as I said to you, I can be the fittest that I've ever been. Why not? You know, I had the thought, mother, too busy in that now, or person who never exercised up until their mid-20s, then all of a sudden became the fittest person that I knew around. Why can't I? So my reframes that I've now had more of recent, that's enabled me to basically give up coffee, give up alcohol, give up sugar. I've had a few shots at this along my time, and you know, each time it's been pretty damn hard. And so my reframes at the time was, I don't need sugar. So that was my reframe, and that didn't really last. Or I don't need coffee, or I don't need alcohol. My reframe on all of that, and it's about finding the right reframe for you that makes sense to you. So what may work for me may not actually work for others as well. So it's about trying to find what actually works. So, you know, you might just do a quick reframe of, you know, I don't need coffee. Well, if your thing is I need coffee every day, and then you go, my reframe is I don't need coffee. Well, how's that going to work for you? And it's really about then my reframe specifically on that is I eat nutritious food. But before I got to I eat nutritious food, I actually went, giving up coffee is easy. And that's all it was. Giving up coffee is easy. So I actually focused on that little part of it for myself. Giving it up is easy, or not having it is easy. So rather than the you don't need it, it's not having it is easy. And that was the reframe that seemed to work for myself in that. To the point now, I've got chocolate sitting in the fridge. Do you think I've had any? No. Because I've just gone, giving it up is easy. And that's been the reframe for myself. You know, things like I've said, I can be the fittest that I've ever been. I've actually changed that around. And my reframe on that is, and once again, I've looked at the data. I had an average resting heart rate when I was quite fit and it fluctuates, you know, through the month as it does, of about 60 beats per minute. And, you know, when I'd go to sleep at night, it'd drop to 48. Now, I recognize that as you do age, it does increase a little bit. So I've just gone, I'm going to get to 60 beats per minute. And that's as simple as that. That to me equals fitness. And that to me, and so that's sort of my reframe on that. So it's about being able to look differently at your thought patterns and what's the right reframe for you. The first reframe might not be the best reframe, but it's about what's the best reframe that's going to get you to move past that limiting belief and turn it really into that empowering belief. It's about really opening yourself up to possibility, and really it's open to your imagination. You're only limited by your imagination of what does that actually look like. For me to actually think about my heart rate, that's taken me on a bit of a journey around my fitness. First of all, it was like, well, I'll be the fittest that I've ever been. Hang on a sec, let's think about something a bit crazy out there in that space. It actually then starts to shift your view, that frame or that lens, particularly when you're given different situations or activities moving forward in the future, how you then respond. And we come back to, I guess, one of the powerful things that I said earlier is that you don't necessarily see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. And that's how you start to then change the world around you in that space. And, you know, things that I did around caffeine and being able to give up caffeine is I read what it did to me. You know, stimulation of hormones, direct impact on the sympathetic nervous system, and then you know, the direct link to the cortisol release and all of that. And as soon as I started to get greater understanding around that and realizing, well, it was really around stimulants, energy, you know, what am I made up of, and, you know, atoms down into the physics part of it. And it actually allows you to release that, to understand what are we as humans actually made up of. I'm actually not a hard, solid being. I'm made up of a series of atoms. So therefore, if I change the energy or reprogram the energy in me through that reframe, and it's about finding that right reframe to change that energy that you have in that. So I guess from that, I've probably thrown a whole heap your way. What reframes may be coming to people from their limiting beliefs?
Well, I like to share. I've noticed from my past experience that, you know, at times when you look at your limiting belief, it's actually not yours. People pass in their notions, their limiting belief to you, and you kind of process it like your own, which is you feel, yeah, that's correct. So every time I come across something like that, I just stop, write down what I feel, and just look back and see, do I really believe it? If yes, why? If most of the times I have understood that, you know, it's not mine, I am processing someone else and taking it like that. And I put a lot of visual notes for me, which you will find it across my home, which is I'm very visual, which is very visual reminders of something like healthy eating. I would just write something. My weight or health is the outcome of choices I make throughout the day. So I put it in the kitchen, I put it, you know, in front of the mirror when I look at myself, and, you know, I feel that I could have been like 2 inches, you know, smaller. So I put all those visual aids. My son is a special kid, so I put the visual reminders that he is unique and beautiful in his own unique way. And and, you know, instead of trying to compare him with worldly standards, because when I step out of the house, that's what people pass it to you. Oh, oh, how come? What will happen? So it's not my limiting belief. So it's their limiting belief, and it's not their fault.
No.
That's their definition of life, of certain events. They have learned it from someone. They have experienced it differently. So I completely relate to that story. So that's how I do a lot of visual sticky notes around my house.
I think you've raised you've raised a principle that we've often explored in these conversations, and it's called the progress principle, which was out of the work of Teresa Amberley and her husband, Stephen Kramer. They wrote a wonderful book called that. And the progress principle simply means keeping meaningful progress visible.
Absolutely.
And it is a great way to live a life where your beliefs aren't limiting you. So well said.
Pasna, that is just wonderful. And also the way that society or other people can, and this is, you know, focusing around the relationships or people in general, can put their limiting beliefs on other people and how you can take it up. So what you've essentially shown in a wonderful example there as well is about instilling, I guess, the beliefs of value and into your child, into your son, to really, from a value perspective, feel valued, to not take on those limiting beliefs that others have.
I think Brian's mentioning in the chat how accountability partners help us with this, and I think that's really part of it as well. I think you also raised your hands on a lot of interesting things that we realise that what we actually believe is not ours. I remember a time when my son was a teenager, 15 years old, and it was those of you that have had teenagers, you know it's not the greatest age in the world, 15, for a parent. And I remember realizing that I had my father's beliefs at that time as a father, that they weren't actually mine. And to let go of my father's beliefs was very empowering, you know, at that time. And it did, over time, help me in my relationship with my son. I'm pleased to say we didn't have a good relationship when he was 15, but we do today when he's nearly 50. We do today. But that was a powerful moment, recognizing that I was believing something that actually wasn't my belief.
And it truly is empowering to recognize that and to let it go. And that's also how that's another tool that can be used, which is just about letting it go. So it's about the process of writing it and going, is that a belief of myself or not? And letting it go. Remembering that is not a belief, that is essentially yours. It's been put onto you by someone else. Another tool that you can use, which I love, is the rock star, is to rock star yourself as well.
Please explain.
And really, that is thinking of yourself as the complete amped up rock star version that we all are. And we all are our own inner rock star. And what does that actually look like? You know, if you had no inhibitions and you played out, full out, what does that actually look like to yourself? And so a couple of iterations that I've had, for example, and I want to take you through the evolution of that, because once again, this is around your own imagination and enabling yourself to be limitless in your imagination. So an example being, you know, think about you and your intent around whatever activity that might be, what it is that you might want in life, the love, health, happiness, relationships, all of that. And then, you know, and actually really amp it up. So an example of what I would say, and I know that I've had this, is that, you know, I help people to be the catalyst for change in their life. I love it. Nothing wrong with that. But what does an amp up of that look like? So what does the rock star of that actually look like? You know, over the last 5 years, I've been the catalyst for change for people nationally and internationally. Well, that's starting to rock star it up a little bit, you know. That's sounding kind of cool, and you know, that rolls off the tongue easily. And so then what does a, you know, real amped up version look like? And I'm sure the next evolution, if I came and talked to you in a couple of months' time, would it even look more awesome? But, you know, it's then, you know, over the last 5 years, I've ignited change and transformation in people to let go of their fears and to unleash themselves and live full lives. Wow. It's, you know, it's a pretty, you know, strong rock star statement.
And of course, the best version of us is such a rock star.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, we reminded ourselves over and over in these conversations that, you know, each of us is a one-of-a-kind human being. So your best is awesome. It can't be anything else, right? And it's kind of recognizing this and experiencing this. I mean, one of the things, Peter, when we go back to your corporate life, when you were my client those years ago, we used to talk about catching people doing things right as a different way to the corporate world, and because the modus operandi, the limiting belief was catching people doing things wrong.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But when we changed that in the environment and we started focusing on catching people doing things right, all of a sudden we realized, well, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things right.
It's a great example, Ian. And all we did was just flipped one single word.
Yep.
And it just, changed everything.
Yeah, the reframe, one word, went from wrong to right.
It's like so incredibly obvious, but people couldn't see it until that moment. So it's funny, isn't it?
And of course, as a consequence of all of a sudden, we're realizing everyone is already doing a lot of things right. As a consequence, people got this self-belief.
Yep.
And they started doing even more things right. And performance went through the roof.
Extraordinary.
So
I was just going to say, so often reframes, it can be just a change of a word.
It's a single word sometimes, absolutely. Yeah. It's finding that right word for that reframe. So I'm really interested, you know, I've taken you through a bit of a pretty significant journey today of starting to understand potentially some of your limiting beliefs, a couple of different tools. And I'm interested what's coming up for people. Have any of you got any reframes that you'd like to share? What else is coming up for you in this moment too?
Just touching on what I was talking about, worrying about validation of others, in terms of reframing, it might be something along the lines of, do I need to be validated by someone else? Can I validate myself? Something along those lines. And try and work out linking in your rock star thing, because I did have that same conversation with someone the other day about sort of like faking it till you make it sort of thing, like in my mind pretend that I think I actually am better than what I am sort of thing, to then you create your own ability to self-validate yourself.
Absolutely, David. I couldn't agree more with that.
Brian Tracy had a wonderful line. The me I see is the me I'll be.
Yep, definitely. I couldn't agree more.
I think mine, Simone, is I know what I bring to the equation.
Oh, I like it. It's powerful.
Are there any others? Because we're sort of getting towards the end of our time, and as is my practice, we'll give Simone the last word, and I just want to give you a quick look at coming events. But are there any others before we get to those moments?
Yeah, I just want to say, in the work that I do within the injured worker community, I work daily with people who identify themselves as being an injured worker.
Yeah.
And I ask them what their name is. Yeah. So if I was meeting Ian for the first time, I'd say, Ian, even though I know your name is Ian, what is your name? And he would say, Ian. And I would say to him, so why do you think of yourself as an injured worker? And he would say, because I have a workplace injury. And I would respond with, your name is Ian. You have an injury. You are not your injury. Because if I was my injury, I would be crushed spine, which is pretty not a really nice name to have. I much prefer Rosemary. So
lovely reframe, Rosemary.
Sorry?
A lovely reframe.
Yeah, it's just a way of taking it out of a context that has become so negative and so heavy to carry, and giving them back the respect of themselves. Because if we can respect ourselves, then we will actually require respect from everybody else around us. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, do you think some more, and I'll just quickly share my screen with you and just talk a little bit about the upcoming events. In March, I'm doing a couple of things for the very first time. I'm doing live stream events and a Q&A, and I'll send you a link to this next time. And because they're the very first time, if you take the Wise Leaders Community link, you can do those with compliments as well. Next month, we've had Peter in the room with us today. Well, Peter's going to be sharing with us how to free your hidden powers for life, leadership, and customer service in Awakening Wonder. As I said at the start, Peter's known as Mr. Wonderful, and it'd be great, Peter, next time on the 7th of April to have you as our guest. And then later on in April, I'm doing the first of a series of seminars, which again are all new, and they're about this first one's about ensuring equity of opportunity for everyone. And because they're new, again, if you use the Wise Leader Community link, you'll see that you can do them complimentary. And I'll send those to you. So that's the upcoming events. But before we sort of hand over to Simone for a final word, are there anything else that you would like to put into the pie for us?
It's funny when you said pie, Ian. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago now since we were working together, and I always remember the story of your grandmother's apple pie. It's such a strong story that stayed with me right to today, because you could still smell the scent in the kitchen, and the way you described it, we were there in the kitchen as your grandmother made her apple pie. So that was just something random that came to mind as I heard you say the word pie.
Isn't it a wonderful thing how every time I think of her, and I can literally shut my eyes and smell that pie. But she used to say to us as children and young people, and at school I'd heard that, you know, all day every day teachers would say, well, and what are you doing, stupid? And it got so bad at school that I thought my name was stupid. and then on Sunday, I used to hear that terrible word, you're a sinner. And so I spent a lot of my early life thinking I'm bad. I'm not only bad, I'm stupid. But one day, my grandmother looked across the table and she looked straight into my eyes and she said, you know what, you're special. And at that moment, there was a change of limiting beliefs. Now, it took a while to not believe I was stupid or bad and to become the vision that she had. But just that simple exchange, and it came from love, of course. I was facilitating a group this morning, and we had people, I think, from 17 different countries involved in the conversation. It was quite fascinating. And the topic that I was leading people on was, let's do whatever we do from love. Let's not do it for love. Let's do it from love. And it was a fascinating conversation. And I think that's the thing. And I ended that conversation with the words of a song that was written a very long time ago by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. So it's going right back. The song was actually written in 1965. So some of you weren't even born then. But the song goes, "What the world needs now is love, sweet love, because that's the only thing that there's just too little of." And I think we've come up with this. We live in a world where people are limited in their beliefs, and they don't think about love, and they don't think about love as the creative force. They don't think about love as the most powerful force. They've got other beliefs. And one of the missions that we're on, and I'm sure that one of the reasons you're here and you're attracted to be here, is because we're building a different world. And hopefully in my lifetime, we will build a world where it's safe for your daughter to walk home direct and rather than go around the block, Brian. So Simone, last word to you, unless there's anyone else before we do that.
I like that, Ian. That's all I'd say. I love that. Like, I think it'd be great if people felt safe, and I love the concept of all we need is love. I reckon it's brilliant. Good work.
A woman dies every week in Australia. I think that's appalling, and I want to do something about it.
Good.
So I guess from my perspective, I want to thank you all for partaking in the conversation, for being so open to provocation of thought, from potentially going to a few journeys throughout your life and your childhood, looking at your experiences, starting to understand where some of this has come from, and starting to question, and in some cases let go or reframe or rock star it moving forward, where you might end up being. So I hope this is a catalyst for change and transformation for you from this conversation on your life paths and where you might end up.